So, well, welcome to everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Mathieu from Delpierre & Co bookshop in Paris. And, you know, this year has been a bit particular, and with the cancellations of all the art fairs and the book fairs. And we were very happy to join forces with Aperture and Paris Photo, which we thank very much for organizing the final jury of the Photo Book Awards and organizing this series of online talks celebrating the Photo Book Awards and the Photo Book Review, co-edited by Delpierre & Co and Aperture. So thank you very much, everyone. I will leave you now, Sarah, the hand. We're welcoming today a roster of 4 international artists. Hi, June. June is here. So June from Brazil. We have Gloria from Madrid, Spain. We have Edgar from London and Sumiya from Calcutta. And Sarah, it's your turn.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mathieu. Thank you for all of the support from Delpierre, from Aperture and Paris Photo. It was a joy to be a juror for the shortlist. For those, we let in a few people early. So if you've been here for a few minutes, you've heard me say that choosing a favorite photo book would be impossible to me, like choosing a favorite child. But when they asked if I would like to do an event that highlighted, well, they said 1, and I said, how about 4 of some of my favorite projects. I feel very grateful to have been just a juror for the shortlist and not have to pick just one. When we chose it, it was taking advantage of the COVID situation and fortunately not having to worry about where anyone was. So as Mathieu just mentioned, we are really from all over. Thank you to these artists for agreeing to join me. The way we're going to begin is we're going to allow or invite each of them to spend about 5 minutes presenting their project, speaking, and then what we will, after that, and they will each share their screen as we go through that. And then following that, we'll have a conversation where I have some questions prepared for each of them, but I've encouraged all of us to feel free to interrupt one another and say what's on your mind, because there are only 5 of us with our microphones live, and we should take advantage of that. So thank you to the many people tuning in from all over the world. The chat is enabled, so it is fun to see where everyone is from, although I'm not going to respond to that while the artists are speaking, because of course it's a special treat to get to hear each of them talk about these projects. So I believe we're beginning with Edgar, and the rest of us will mute our microphones while he's speaking, and let's get going. I can't wait.
Thank you so much. So I've timed myself. I'll be exactly 5 minutes or thereabouts. So I'll try as quickly as I can. So hi everyone, thanks so much. Let me just share my screen to start with. And can you see my screen, all of you? Perfect.
Perfect.
Okay, so my book is comprised of 2 separate publications, a book of images produced by me and historical archive imagery appropriated by me, a facsimile copy of the diary of an inmate I worked with, in which he wrote especially for this context, and a film which is accessible through a QR code in a card supplied with the books, and all of them enclosed inside an original prison evidence bag. So the book is presented in the utilitarian fashion you saw in the first photo, as that is how the inmates' diaries would normally be discharged from prison. However, I won't just be showing you images of the book here, but also of the shows and of the work itself, so you can get a sense of how the work moves across different platforms. So this project is titled What Photography and Incarceration Have in Common with an Empty Vase. This is, of course, a Lacanian reference. It's a fragmented, multi-layered, multifaceted body of work developed with grain projects and also HM Prison Birmingham, but especially its inmates, their families, and a myriad of other local organizations and individuals like charities, colleges, universities, youth groups, many of which associated with the prison. I should say from the outset that although I visit the inmates and their families in prison regularly, in their cells, during family days, during legal visits, I opted early on not to photograph inside the prison walls. So in this project, I used the social context of incarceration as a starting point to really explore the philosophical concept of absence, So the project scrutinizes how we deal with the absence of a loved one brought on by enforced separation. So from an ontological perspective, I was interested in questions like, how does one represent the subject that is absent or hidden from view? Photography for so long has been about a relationship with the subject it purports to represent. So what does it mean for photography to have a relationship with the absence of that subject rather than the subject itself? So what does it mean for photography if it doesn't identify with its subject but with its absence? Can absence be a form of activation? Moreover, in an era of fake news, how can we best acknowledge the kind of fictional and imaginative dimension of our relation to photographs? So the more you know about the work, I suppose, the more you become aware of this constant tension between revelation stroke documentation and concealment stroke obfuscation. So by giving a voice to inmates and their families, and I guess addressing a prison as a set of social relations rather than a mere physical space, my work tried to really rethink and I suppose counter to some degree the sort of imagery normally associated with incarceration, which is usually revolving around themes of violence, drugs, criminality, and race. And even though it looks as though I'm depicting elements of violence in some of the images, all is not always what it seems. So whilst I photographed offenders, ex-offenders, their relatives, I also photographed people enacting their stories. And this methodology was employed so one would never know who is depicted in the images. And this was a way for me to really disrupt the power relations and I guess the kind of voyeurism inherent to the consumption of this type of imagery. So I went to great lengths to avoid images whose sole purpose, in my opinion, is to confirm the already held opinions within, I guess, dominant ideology about crime and punishment. So these images represent to me an act of resistance. They're a counterpoint to the role that documentary photography normally plays in these ethically charged environments. And I guess, they seek the hidden narratives rather than the glaring truths. And many of the images talk, to me at least, about the situation of agency, the difficulty of testifying at any precise moment in history. And that, of course, photographs of the, I guess, the so-called other, of violence, of death, of conflict, they raise a disconcerting paradox. They contribute to really intensifying a traumatic awareness of the subject, but at the same time, they have a pacifying effect. And of course, Susan Sontag used to call these sort of an apotropaic device. But despite this, I have come to believe that there is a place for photography in these sorts of environments. The point at issue is, what role should it play and how should it operate? How can photographs reveal and resist at the same time? And it's in this spirit that I would like to coin a new term today, a lipograph. So a lipograph is obviously inspired in the Oulipo movement's lipogram. A lipograph is a visual representational device which omits its referential subject. It's the sort of proverbial impossible document. It demands, I guess, a strategic renunciation of the viewer's predisposition for certainty. And on this basis, I'd just like to finish by telling you a little bit about, giving you an insight into one particular image, which is this one here. So, so you can understand how the hidden narratives can't be understood through the images alone, but through the combination of the text, the books, the exhibitions, the talks, and the diaries. So the blue rectangle featured in this image is printed directly on the glass, and so it floats above the artwork. The paint itself is is applied using a special serigraphy process, which I developed using the same kind of paint that is normally applied in stained glass windows in churches and cathedrals. And this photograph is a homage to an inmate I met in prison. So this inmate had the darkest cell I'd come across in my time there. And although he had requested a transfer from to a different cell on multiple occasions, the prison authorities were, of course, reluctant to do this because he was a very disruptive individual. So resigned that he would have to spend the rest of his 10-year sentence in this dingy, dark room, he asked his family to smuggle in every month, and I mean smuggle like you normal smuggle drugs, a blue felt tip pen. And so for over 1 year, he collected enough pens to paint his cell window a sky blue color, so the blue that he could no longer see. And of course, the landscape depicted in the background was shot in the Everglades, which is where he last vacationed with his family prior to being incarcerated. So all the images here have these sort of these sort of personal stories attached to them. But of course, they're multi-layered. And that's my presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh my gosh, Edgar, so much
I think I crammed too much in there, but
oh, fantastic. When we return, I want to hear you. That was amazing. I'm glad we recorded it because I'm going to listen to it again in an hour. That was just an incredible synopsis. Thank you. Really great. Thank you. June, I think we had asked for you to go next. How does that sound?
Hi, that sounds so good. Of course,
Okay.
my computer, something's going on with the internet, so I had to log on my phone, and I'm not going to be able to present except for this book. I'm here.
I was worried if you had more trouble, I was gonna try to present your book for you, but it's much better to hear you do it. So
I made it.
I'm gonna mute myself now. Take it away, June.
So thank you so much for including me in this conversation. I feel so honored to be a part of this conversation. This is my first book, and I printed it earlier this year, and it actually released the week that New York went into lockdown. So it was an interesting time an interesting year to release this book. So Maracuya is, it's a reflection on my own personal experience as the daughter of two people who migrated from Brazil and into the Deep South, and who remained undocumented for a very long time, and who also brought over a lot of our family and our family friends who also share a similar status. And in that dynamic, I have been and was for a very long time the only person who had access to dual citizenship. And so was able to return home in ways that a lot of my family members have still not been able to. And so, you know, I'm thinking a lot about, you know, what it looks like to be able to, you know, what a privilege it is to be able to return home within that first generation who migrated, especially for undocumented folks. I think it's quite difficult to do. It's usually the second or the third generation. And by then, you know, things already get lost in the process of migration, but by then, you know, you have inevitably assimilated in many ways. And so I always understood the responsibility that I had to sort of nurture and protect aspects of my own family and my culture in that privilege of being able to return home. And so when I was thinking about doing this book, I've thought about doing it for a very, very long time. For many years, it was living in my head as I was taking, you know, those trips home and going back to South Carolina as well. The story that's sort of just depicted throughout the book, they're fragments from my own memories and my own perspective, you know, seen through my lens as one person in this family dynamic. And then the images are, I was actually revisiting the book this morning because it's, you know, it's quite hard for me to do because these memories are difficult, you know, to revisit. And so I try not to look at it too often, only when I really need to. But I think that's the beautiful part of this book as well, is that when I decided to do it, you know, the memories and everything that I had experienced was festering in my body, and like, you know, these physical symptoms started to occur from, you know, what would later be, and I would find out PTSD and anxiety. So all of these physical things started happening. And as I started, I sought out psychiatry and all of these other things. And as I started to go through that process of unpacking everything that had happened in that process of migration, in, you know, moving to the Deep South as, you know, Brazilians, I was sort of taking all of these things that was like living in my body and molding and shaping. And then all of a sudden, you know, it became this book. And now, you know, they live in my body, but they don't sit here. They can just sit in this book, in this object that I can now share with other people. And not only that, most importantly, I can share with, you know, the new generation of kids that from my family that are now being born in the US, who obviously will always have roots in Brazil, but, you know, they're planting roots in another country. And so I'm thinking about, you know, what it means to have this dual citizenship, and what do I do with it, and how do I protect the things that I find to be really important about not only my family, but my culture, and really hang on to those things. And so this book is essentially the beginning of that process. You know, it's like I had to acknowledge all of the things that had happened first, in order to be able to now sort of make work and continue to unfold, you know, this experience, this understanding, this knowledge that I've gained, you know, in this process of migration, and, you know, being part of this dynamic of a family of mixed status and new people to the United States, et cetera. And it's also, I think, really representative of this break, right, that happened in my family, because none of us had left Brazil before. We were the very first to leave Brazil. So it's like a major break in this family unit, you know, that is now sort of being carried on in another place. And so that's what a lot of these images are. They're like very silent, still moments, I think, of someone who knows that they aren't going to stay for too long, you know, that they're going to perhaps come back one day, hopefully, but they're like the moments that I just had to hang on to, because I don't know when the next time I'll get to experience these moments again. But there are also moments that I think if you're, you know, Brazilian, you can like relate to in many ways. You'll be able to see, this is my aunt, but you'll be able to see, I think, your aunt in this photo as well. So that's, I don't know how long that was, but that's
that was perfect. Yeah. That was 5 minutes. That was such a dream.
Oh,
and I have to say, I happen to be thinking a lot about Brazil these days because I myself am working on a project about Brazilian modernism and sort of what narratives have been left out of photo history.
Yeah.
But I find it, you know, this is a brave book in terms of how personal it is. You know, you and I had never met, but I feel as if I understand something about you. And so that's one of the gifts of this book. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so much of the whole migrating process is about hiding a lot of the things. So I'm really grateful to hear that you've been able to see something.
Yeah, well, thanks to you. I think we all. So okay, let's carrying on. Soumya, I think we said you were gonna. No, who did we say was gonna be next? Gloria, were you next? I can't remember. Sorry. Okay, Gloria's next.
I'm next.
I'm so grateful to each of you. Gloria, take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you, Edgar.
Sorry. May I just say one more thing? For those of you who didn't know, Gloria's book, before, I had nothing to do with who wins the photo book of the year. I can only pick the short list. But Gloria, yesterday, it was announced that she, her book that she's about to speak about was the winner of the photo book of the year. So congratulations to you, Gloria. That's, we're thrilled. So thank you.
I mean, I have no words. I can't express how thrilled I am. I'm like shaking and with this fire inside since last night, but thank you so much. Thank you. So, and congratulations, Edgar and June. I love your works. I mean, I knew a little bit about it, but it's incredible. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about my work, Woman Gonna Agree, which I mostly developed during an artist residence in Lagos, Nigeria. That was my third time over there, and I previously lived for 3 years in Mali. And it comes from my experience while I was in Mali, as I was like kind of frustrated watching all these women that supposedly they were living in a matriarchal system, but for me there were so many injustice and not good things that I just lived with that frustration for all the years I lived there. And then years later I realized that my reaction was wrong, and I was just having this typical reaction of a empowered white and feminist and privileged white women. No? So that's mainly the starting point. And so I arrived to Lagos with these three books, a little more books, but mainly these three books that really led me by the hand to all these theories, which helped me a lot to understand my own position. One is the invention of women, making an African sense of Western gender discourses, from Professor Oyoronke Oyewumi, Male Daughters, Female Husbands for Ife Amadium, and wonderful, beautiful Our Sister Killed Joe from Ama Daido. So these three books, while I was in Lagos, I started realizing how many things I was missing out with my judgment of what I was reading around me in all these countries in Africa that I was visiting or living in. And so I went into the National Museum. I worked with archives. I went to many other places where I could find archives. And then I had the chance to leave the Felabration, which is this wonderful, incredible festival which celebrates Fela Kuti, which the title of the project comes from one of the songs that's called Lady. Lady was released in the Shakara album in 1972. That it was the year where all these oil discoveries and boosted the economy of the country. So at that point, also there was this argument of if empowerment of African women had to go through the model of Western women. So I talk about the white privilege, I talk about the beauty canons, I talk about concepts of modernity. And the third layer, maybe it's the studio shooting that I did in this, where I really take to an extreme this, I hyperbolize or exaggerate all these ideas of the African women that we have in the Western societies, like victims, primitive, hypersexualized, super exotized, and then I went into, because this book won the Image Veve Dummy Award, that I have to thank a lot all the jury team and the directors and the people, the team from the festival, for believing in my project. But the text that I included in the dummy didn't work that much, so I had 1 year to work on it. And at the end, I decided that I had to put myself in the center. So all the texts from the book there's a lot of quotes, but the development of the narrative is mainly mine, and that's how I try to explain a little bit how I went through all how the narrative of my story, of my tale, got into my head. So it was a big effort for me, as I'm not a writer. So I just ask for a little bit of not being so strict with the narrative of the text, as I'm not a writer. So here I'm going to show a little bit some layouts of the project since 2018. It's been around, so at the beginning, I started doing all these layouts exercise, and then I did the photo book. So for me, it was a big help to construct my tale, about the historic part, and the portraits, the studio portraits, I print them on as a curtain, and that's one of the, I mean, I did a lot of exhibitions. I have to say I was very, very lucky. And that was one of the last ones that, and then afterwards the lockdown came. And then since then I showed in Copenhagen, Helsinki, in Tel Aviv, and in Marseille, and they were all they had to go out of the box. So it was another experience. And that's it. I think it was.
Yeah, you guys are so good. I told Leslie Martin, I was like, Leslie, I'm sure we can do it and actually also have a conversation at the end. So thank you. You know, Gloria, I will return to this, but this idea of, I don't think I was aware of how much it had existed in physical form before it was translated into a book. So that is something that I hope we'll return to. But thank you. And again, congratulations.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you.
For us, chiming in from the time zone latest in the day, almost 10 p.m., if I'm not mistaken, half-hour difference. I'm not sure how that works. But Sumiya, thank you for being with us as well. Thank you for volunteering to go last. It's not necessarily. Anyway, you are all fantastic. And let's turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me in this panel. Can you see my screen now? Is it visual? Perfect. So, well, this project name Where the Birds Never Sing. This project is about a massacre happened in 1979, 31st January, on the refugees who came from Pakistan that time, now Bangladesh, mostly the Bengali people who came to India. And after the partition, so the thing started from 47, the partition when happened between these two religion, Muslim and Hindu. And it was not mentioned there that if the people will move to India or if the people will move to Pakistan, if they will get the citizenship or not. But in 1955, they said like, even if they move, depending on whose relatives are living where, they will get the citizenship in both the country. If they move to Pakistan, they will get the citizenship in Pakistan. If they move to India, they will get the citizenship in India. But recently what happened, this new citizenship law in India, where the government is demanding that you have to prove with your documents that you are Indian or not, or you are coming, or you came later. And it's the problematic because during the partition, there's many riots happened. And people, like I never love to say the word refugee because my grandparents, actually I'm the second generation Indian. My grandparents also left Bangladesh due to pressure from the extremists. And these are like forcefully migrated in their own, forcefully they leave their own homeland just for a political reason. They partitioned to country. And I started working in 2000. So this is actually the starting. And then what happened when the people, the upper caste people, they moved to West Bengal and Calcutta and major city places. But the lower caste people who didn't have the money to buy land or house in West Bengal and other city areas in India, they actually depended on the government. So the government gave them a shelter refugee camp in the central India, which is a rocky island, inhospitable place, is a forest area where you are not able to get any kind of access with the people where the city and others. It's very far from the city. Still now, it's a Maoist zone. And it's not at all good for the agriculture also. These people who moved in their 50s, 40s, or like in mid-age, whose profession was the farming or fishing, they don't have the option to do fishing or farming. And the government remained the Congress in our West Bengal state. So there is a party, left party, Communist Party. They always say that if we come to power, we'll give you shelter in West Bengal where the languages will match you because they are coming from Bangladesh and you can stay. The new government formed and they came to power in 77, but they said, we are not ready to invite you people. But then when I started this work, I found this document, this leaflet, which is also inside the book in the English translation, distributed in 78, 22nd January, that the 4 people, political leader who went and said like our 10 crore people from West Bengal will invite 5 crore people with 10 crore hands will invite all the refugee brothers and sisters to our state, West Bengal. And this leaflet was distributed massively. And that is why the people start coming to Sundarban area. This is how it started. but the government never accepted that they have officially invited these people. The book, my first book, Where the Birds Never Sing, starting with the island, the Morichapi Island, and for the book is for the people who departed on 31st January 1979. So this is the only image inside the book of the Morichapi Island, because after the massacre happened in 79, nobody can enter the island. It's officially restricted, and government says the tiger is a forest, but there is no tiger at all for last more than 50, 60 years, but you can't enter. So the entire project I have to make by finding these survivors from different part of India. In 40 years they moved, so I look for them, I found them and made portrait and rest and the archives I have collected from these people, because same, the officially they were remained in power for last 30, 40 years, and they destroyed all the documents. So all the documents I have used in my book is basically the documents I found from the survivor after 40 years. And you can see this letter, 22nd January 79, 7 days before the massacre happened, 31st January. And the rest of the images I made in the other part of the island in Sundarban, which is reenactment, depending on the stories I have found from them and the listen from them. The entire book is also with the conversation between me and my survivors throughout the book. And you will read the incident I'm listening and how I am trying to connect with my past, my roots, because my family also migrate near the seaside because they can't afford to buy lands in Calcutta or in major cities. So I tried to connect what my grandfathers told me stories when I was growing up, and what I perceive from those stories and how I think in present scenario, what was the scenario in 79. It is very difficult to imagine such situation, what happened 40 years back before I born. So I'm in a second generation Indian and trying to find my own roots by my imagination and looking for those survivors. These are the people like missing people from the, so you can see in the right side there is a name, the people who are missing from the first page of the book and the age when they were the time missing. And it was like 60 names I found after 40 years, like during my research in 2-3 years research from 2017 to 2020. And those names are in every page. So every page is dedicated to one person who are missing for the massacre. And these are like the archives. I collected the people who are missing and the faces from them I have used in my book. And the book also ends with these 4 pictures, my friend, who is the masks, because people used masks, went inside the forest during the police firing. And this later is, the book is also starting with a conversation that I'm looking for a rape victim. And then the book is also ending with that letter of that rape victim. And the letter is written, you can see 79, 7th February, which is just 7 days after the massacre happened. She was under height, like her family is under height, so came back and made a report to the chairman of the Udbastu Unnayan, which is refugee union of that time. And this is the ending. And this is actually the paper the government is looking for, the refugee eligibility certificate, because there is no passport, no visa when they're crossing the border during the partition and during the war, 71 liberation war. It's the only certificate the government gave to the people, the survivors, that you will be like settled the places where the government want, and you will not be settled in the place where your language matches. And you will never do any kind of agriculture job. You never demand anything from the government. And this certificate actually government wanting now after 70 years. And many people lost it because they never knew the importance of this paper will be after 70 years. So yeah, so this is actually just about my book. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It is, you know, first of all, it's very, I've read the book carefully. I'll say it's very moving to hear you describe the history that's embedded in it. And it's actually a good segue to my first question, because when I was defending why I wanted to invite the 4 of you, there was a little question of like, well, what do their books have in common? And as anyone listening today can hear, nothing on some level. And yet, on another level, I think each of you does such an extraordinary job of grappling with an incredibly pressing issue, you know, writ large across, and then, sorry, let me think of how I'm going to phrase this. Each of you manages to make something that is at once a beautiful, tactile, satisfying book, you know, a photo book where the photo, you know, Sumiya, you didn't even show that many pictures of yours, but the photographs are incredibly striking, and they wander between fact and fiction and recreation and sort of offering a sense of place. And so I would love to hear each of you speak to like how you reconcile that quest of like, how do you pick something that is important? You know, to me, at least, it feels like each of you knew you were grappling with something important, whether it's the inappropriateness of applying a Western notion of feminism onto these people that you sort of declare in such a forthright way on your cover, Gloria, that I almost doubted its sincerity because it was just so straightforward. You know, rarely does a book offer its own position. So what I would love to hear each of you speak to is like, tell us a little bit about the process of making the book, about who you seek feedback from, about what your goals were and how you balanced the very important issues that you want to present, but also the quest to make a photo book that is on some level deeply satisfying and even pleasurable to hold. So I don't know, should we go in backwards order? Or you chime in as you see fit, but that idea of navigating a very important, timely issue with making something that is also a work of art and carries with it the sort of unique pleasures of that. I would love to hear each of you speak to that.
Should I go first? Perfect.
Yeah,
thank
great.
you. So for me, like as I told, like I grew up in a small town, Midnapur, and my whole of my major part of my life, like I spent here. So imagining the idea of cities and other part of the world, like most of the time, and you know, very small family with like the people who came from Bangladesh, and hearing the stories of their homeland in Bangladesh, what they left and what they had and what they are missing. And when I finally went to Calcutta, and Calcutta was for me the biggest city, like when I first came to Calcutta in 2010, 11, that time, like 8, 9 years back. So after staying there, I realized that our voices were never spoke to the people, because it's always spoke for the big cities, and the upper caste people always speak for them. And the point is, whenever the upper caste or the American or European or anyone who is telling Indian story, they always show us as a victim, like we are a victim of some incident. But in my story, if you see the images, they are the heroes of my work. Like they are my like relatives, my I never say subject, I always say my collaborators, and I always converse with them. Like before making a work, I always show them the first book when I made, I send it to them and ask them if you're happy with the book, like if any of images, anything you think is problematic, because now is the time of internet, so anyone can see, their next generation can see the images, because everything is archived in Google. You don't need to go to museum where you don't have the access, only the upper caste has the access or upper class has the access. You have the internet. So from me, it was very important to tell our story in our way as the heroes, not as the victim of some incident, because we are colored, because we are brown, and as because always if you see the picture made in 60s, 70s, 80s, the refugees always like flash on their face and someone looking to the camera, and like these people are alien or exotic coming from a different world. But no, like we are part of this world, and we have to tell this story in our heroic way. So that is why, like, this is my inspiration.
Sumiya, I just, in order to be fair to everyone,
yeah.
I would love, I mean, this is the curse of having 4 incredible presenters. I would love to hear you speak more, but I do want to give everyone a chance to just sort of respond to this idea of, I mean, and that was beautiful to hear the feedback that you get from your collaborators, not your subjects, I think. But I would also love, Edgar, I don't know if you want to go next. You're not muted, so maybe I'll ask you.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I guess it's a tricky question to some degree. I mean, I've always had a recalcitrant relationship with photography. I've always seen photography as insufficient to some degree. You know, in some ways, almost a singularly inadequate medium for communication. But I still only work with photography. So the thing that I kept having in my mind was, how do you go beyond what already exists out there in terms of the way in which people approach the subject matter? And again, I've been very interested in this relationship between photography and absence, partly because of experiences I've had of loss, you know, in the last few years. And I wanted to bring an element of that into the work. So it was always to me about, you know, how to respond, how can you find a way to respond to these challenges, you know, the sort of the restrictive elements within photography of talking with photographs, and how do you overcome them? So I employed a whole series of metafictional narratives and devices throughout the work to deal with that. But in terms of making the decisions, it came through a long process, a process of immersing myself in the environment for nearly 3 years, of getting to know the people, the individuals, the prisoners. I worked really, really closely with one in particular. And after that, it was a process of also with the organizations that were offering me support, like Grain, obviously working with the designers for nearly 6 months. It took about 6 months to edit the book. So it's a long process.
Well, that is definitely evidenced in each of your books. Yes, thank you. That's great. Gloria, do you want to go next?
Yes, thank you. Well, I was just thinking that one point in common that we have is like the gaze towards the other, no, the exotic or the victim or the hero or whatever you want, or the immigrant. And on my project, one of the main things, what I found in these books is that before colonization, gender was not the privilege in society wasn't due to gender, more to age or to lineage. Or so through colonization of the mind, it was also the concept of women, it was also colonized. And to end, my conclusion was afterwards, many months reading and trying to understand what I was talking about, is that we can't universalize was hegemonic and mainstream feminist discourses. And I think that maybe we can apply this to everyone, to every project. We can't universalize every judgment or every way of looking to each other. And that's it, because I think time is running.
No, that's fine. And also I did, fortunately, in your presentation, I think we also heard a little bit about how it existed physically, and that was sort of instrumental in how you translated it into.
Yeah. In my case, it was like that. I mean, I did like, I don't know, like 17, 18 layouts, different layouts in different venues and different countries. And I was very lucky, and I won prizes, and it was like, wow. And then when it arrived to make the photo book, it was really a good gym for me. I really had it in my head. I explained it to my editor and to the to the designer and everyone. I had it like we had to fight a little bit between us, but it was more or less finished.
A good little wrestling match can help. So yeah. Jim, maybe you'll talk a little bit about how you envisioned how it became a book, and sort of maybe what other forms or options you've considered or that you're dreaming about for the future.
Yeah, thank you. I was really conscious about this, not being like a coffee table book, because of I think everybody's already addressed this idea of sensationalizing these really traumatic things that happen across the board. So I was really intentional about it sort of being kind of like a quiet thing, but also I'm also thinking about the way that people, whip out books from their bags and read them on the subway. I don't want this thing to be precious. I want it to be like this quiet, secret that you find, like you would find, an old journal that, somebody wrote. I hope that this cover gets banged up and dirtied, and then it gets tucked in somewhere, someone forgets about it and then finds it in 50 years, because that's I think, what it feels like to hold a lot of the events that happen that I talk about throughout this book. So I was really intentional about making it, you know, a reasonable size, like something that, you know, isn't gonna like call your attention. It's gonna be in the middle of a coffee table. It could be, but.
Okay, so no, we don't have much more time, but I'm going to ask a sort of lightning round question, but to end. And here, and maybe June, I'm going to start with you for this one, because in the back you write, first of all, my copy, I'm going to keep it nice and clean, not on a coffee table. If anyone needs a nice copy in the future, you can ask me and I'll have one. But I want to talk about dedications, sort of to who, you know, we've talked a lot about who you're presenting in these books and your relationship with them, but June, I noticed that you wrote in the back for Rogeria and Elcio. And maybe each of you would just take 30 seconds to say either actually in the book, because Soumya, you also had a very prominent, but either who you're actually dedicating it to or in your mind to whom the book is dedicated, whether it's explicit or not. June, you want to start?
No, for my parents.
Yes, I thought so.
For my parents.
And is that you in the
100%
snapshot?
for them.
Is that you in the car?
Yeah, I'm in the background. Yeah, that's like, we hadn't been here too long in the US anyway. We hadn't been there for too long. So yeah, for them. Luckily, I'm so grateful that they're still here, and that, you know, they've been able to give me, I've inherited, you know, all of the things that they've been able to pass down. And this is like me trying to hold on to all of these things in like the most protective way possible.
Great. Soumya, or no, Edgar, you're unmuted. So why don't you tell us about your dedication and you?
I dedicated to both of my grandmothers who passed away quite recently. And in fact, I should say that the previous book I published was also dedicated to a good friend that sort of passed away. And it actually was that experience of loss that's led me to actually think about a lot of these projects and some of, you know, the dealing with sort of these themes with photography. And it's actually also inspired the new project that I'm working on, where I'm actually going to Libya to sort of retrace his steps. He was a friend that was killed in Libya during the Libya war a few years ago.
That's interesting. So Soumya, I kind of gave it away about, or did I say who yours was dedicated to? Okay.
My both grandfathers, like, who died, and like the stories I got from them, what I'm working now. So yeah, I love to dedicate.
But also, I'll just say.
Yeah, for all people like who departed. And yeah, it's already mentioned in the book, but in my mind, like, the story is starting from my grandfathers, like from whom I got to know about all this.
And Gloria, what about you?
I have 2 minutes. Oh my God.
It's okay.
Nobody.
You can answer a different question if you want, or you can talk about.
No, I mean, I didn't think of, I mean, I can't dedicate it to, I mean, I have to thank so many people that were with me on the process. And of course I could dedicate it to all these women that wrote those books. And that's it, because I mean, they've been like screaming out loud what is not evident for us. So I just invite, at the end of my book, I put a long list of video, I mean, films and novels and whatever. And that's all the things that I accompany, and films. And so just to all these people that are fighting to change our hegemonic view. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful way to end, because I think all of us do want to fight against this, and each of you have made something that is both an extraordinary artistic treasure, a pleasure to hold, and really helps get at some bigger issues that was why we believe in the power of photography. So thank you all so much. Thank you, Del Pier, Aperture, Perry Photo, mostly thanks to the artists, thanks to everyone who gathered with us. We had a great turnout. I hope we can preserve the chat. There were some incredible comments there that we didn't even get to turn to. And I guess, Mathieu, do you want me to say stay tuned, because in 10 minutes there's going to be another one, or should I leave that to you?
Yeah, sure. Stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sarah.
So much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all.
Everyone.